This beautiful game was over in just 29 moves. Magnus Carlsen had white, Alireza Firouzja black, and it was part of the Banter Blitz Final 2020. I'm covering the whole series of games, and Magnus has fallen behind in the match by a game. He's trying to strike back, level the score. So he kicks off with pawn to e4 here. Alireza repeats the Sicilian. We had knight f3, pawn d6. This open Sicilian was played, knight f6, knight c3, and here Alireza plays the Najdorf variation with pawn to a6. And now Magnus plays a very offbeat move, pawn to a3. This is actually the 15th most common move in the database here that I'm looking at, so very offbeat. But what we see is that after pawn to e6, Alireza goes for the Scheveningen setup rather than going pawn to e5. We actually get back into these Keres attack lines after pawn to g4, but with the moves a6 and a3 inserted. We had pawn h6 now, pawn to h4, knight c6, and now white wants to go g5 and then recapture with the pawn after pawn takes, but at the moment there's a pin against the rook. So rook g1 played, preparing g5. And now black's response looks slightly surprising, but this is theory in the Keres attack. We had pawn to h5, and the best way for white to respond here might surprise you. But before I show the move, if you are new to the channel, not yet subscribed, do consider subscribing, never miss a video. So here the best way to play is actually captures the pawn, and that's what Magnus played. Because if you go pawn to g5, the knight actually finds a nice home on g4. If you start going f3 or bishop e2, then actually there's some tactics going on. The queen's coming to b6, hitting this one, x-raying the pawn behind. It's good for black. So we didn't have g5. Magnus captured here. The knight recaptured, and now bishop g5. An annoying move to meet. You can go bishop e7, you can go knight f6. Alireza goes queen b6, counter-attacking the knight, hitting this pawn, but knight b3 solves both problems in one move. Now we had bishop d7 developing, bishop e2 hits this knight here, and if you drop back to f6, pawn h5 is uncomfortable for black. The white attack is coming very quickly here, as we can see. So Alireza goes pawn to g6 instead. We had queen d2 from Magnus, he's preparing to castle. Alireza went rook to c8 here, and now it was interesting to see the difference in styles. So Alireza was noting that if white castles and gives this pawn on f2, actually this is going to be very dangerous for black, with a rook coming to the f-file, attacking the king. But Magnus instead played more prudently, and this is the top computer move. He went bishop to e3, kicks the queen back, and then castles the king. So Alireza now needs to find a plan, and it's tricky to see how to proceed here. Magnus was looking at knight e5, he was calculating lines with f4, knight c4, takes here, queen recaptures and bishop d4, white still doing well here. Alireza was also looking at playing his bishop to g7, giving the pawn on d6 but trying to hold that endgame. Instead he went pawn b5, trying to attack like this, but after f4, it really is tricky here for black because the pawn breaks are coming much faster for white, and black just isn't quite in time with this b4 stuff right now. But this is Alireza. Can he shake it up? So he goes knight to a5 now. He wants to get one of those defenders off the board, opens up this c-file. Magnus takes on a5, the queen recaptured, and now he goes bishop d4 again. This is really uncomfortable. You can't push e5, or then we simply capture here and everything's falling apart. If you recapture, we're going there. If you try bishop h6 to try and win the queen, well, we can actually go rook to g5 here, and the whole house is collapsing for black on the dark squares. So we didn't have this move e5. Alireza went rook to h7 here. Magnus simply went king b1. And now Alireza goes b4, trying to shake it up on the queen side, but actually it's no good in this position. Taking is even good, but Magnus goes knight to a2. Using this tactic, you can't take the pawn here, or you lose your queen on a5. So the knight captured on f4, Alireza tries to mix it up. Magnus recaptures here, and this is his point. Pawn to e5. He forks these two pieces. However, after Magnus retreats, the pawn captures here. The best move was played by Magnus. He doesn't take back here, instead he takes here. He just squashes the black attack, and now the king is in all sorts of trouble down the f-file, as we can see. So the rook came to b8, pressuring that knight. We had pawn h5 from Magnus, starting to rip open lines on the king side. That pawn was captured, and now the rook invaded, coming down to g8 here. The queen came back to b6, preparing this a5 move, but now Magnus is really starting to crash through. So he goes bishop to c4, pressuring this square. Yes, black has a5. It looks like you're getting mated if you move the knight, but it hits d3, a beautiful blockading square, covering b2. Black can do nothing here, and Alireza can hardly find a move. He goes rook to g7 here, a complete blunder, but there was very little going on. Magnus captured, here Alireza resigned. If you take that piece back, we're simply coming through like this, and so on. So Magnus strikes back, evens the match. If you want to see the whole playlist, click here, and I'll see you again on the next video. Thanks for watching, see you soon.